into view. The advancing fleet soon came up with the Mira, when the latter spread her sails again, and all moved slowly on together toward the coast of England. The ships had directed their course so much to the eastward, that when they made the land they were not very far from the Straits of Dover. As they drew near to the English shore, they watched very narrowly for the appearance of Harold's cruisers, which they naturally expected would have been stationed at various points to guard the coast, but none were to be seen. There had been such cruisers, and there still were such off other harbors, but it happened very fortunately for William that those which had been stationed to guard this part of the island had been withdrawn a few days before on account of their provisions being exhausted. Thus, when William's fleet arrived, there was no enemy to oppose their landing. There was a large and open bay, called the Bay of Pevensey, which lay smiling before them, extending its arms as if inviting them in. The fleet advanced to within the proper distance from the land, and there the seamen cast their anchors, and all began to prepare for the work of disembarkation. A strong body of soldiers is of course landed first on such occasions. In this instance the archers, William's favorite corps, were selected to take the lead. William accompanied them. In his eagerness to get to the shore, as he leaped from the boat, his foot slipped and he fell. The officers and men around him would have considered this an evil omen, but he had presence of mind enough to extend his arms and grasp the ground, pretending that his prostration was designed, and saying at the same time, "Thus I seize this land. From this moment it is mine." As he arose, one of his officers ran to a neighboring hut, which stood near by upon the shore, and breaking off a little of its thatch, carried it to William, and putting it in his hand, said that he thus gave him seisin of his new possession. This was a customary form in those times of putting a new owner into possession of lands which he had purchased or acquired in any other way. The new proprietor would repair to the ground, where the party whose province it was to deliver the property would detach something from it, such as a piece of turf from the bank, or a little of the thatch from a cottage, and offering it to him would say, "Thus I deliver thee seisin," that is, possession of this land. This ceremony was necessary to complete the conveyance of the estate. The soldiers, as soon as they were landed, began immediately to form an encampment, and to make such military arrangements as were necessary to guard against an attack or a sudden appearance of an enemy. While this was going on, the boats continued to pass to and fro, accomplishing as fast as possible the work of disembarkation. In addition to those regularly attached to the army, there was a vast company of workmen of all kinds, engineers, pioneers, carpenters, masons, and laborers, to be landed, and there were 3 towers, or rather forts, built of timber, which had been framed and fashioned in Normandy, ready to be put up on arriving. These now had to be landed piece by piece on the strand. These forts were to be erected as soon as the army should have chosen a position for a permanent encampment, and were intended as a means of protection for the provisions and stores. The circumstance shows that the plan of transporting buildings ready made across the seas had not been invented anew by our emigrants to California. While these operations were going on, William dispatched small squadrons of horse as reconnoitering parties to explore the country around to see if there were any indications that Harold was near. These parties returned one after another, after having gone some miles into the country in all directions, and reported that there were no signs of an enemy to be seen. Things were now getting settled, too, in the camp, and William gave direction that the army should kindle their fires for the night, and prepare to eat their suppers. His own supper, or dinner, as perhaps it might be called, was also served, which he partook with his officers in his own tent. His mind was in a state of great contentment and satisfaction at the successful accomplishment of the landing, and at finding himself thus safely established at the head of a vast force within the realm of England. Every circumstance of the transit had been favorable excepting one, and that was that 2 of the ships belonging to the fleet were missing. William inquired at supper if any tidings of them had been received. They told him in reply that the missing vessels had been heard from. They had, in some way or another, been run upon the rocks and lost. There was a certain astrologer who had made a great parade, before the expedition left Normandy, of predicting its results. He had found by consulting the stars that William would be successful, and would meet with no opposition from Harold. This astrologer had been on board one of the missing ships, and was drowned. William remarked on receiving this information, "What an idiot a man must be, to think that he can predict, by means of the stars, the future fate of others, when it is so plain that he cannot foresee his own." It is said that William's dinner on this occasion was served on a large stone instead of a table. This stone still remains on the spot, and is called the Conqueror's Stone to this day. The next day after the landing, the army was put in motion, and advanced along the coast towards the eastward. There was no armed enemy to contend against them there, or to oppose their march. The people of the country, though which the army moved, far from attempting to resist them, were filled with terror and dismay. This terror was heightened, in fact, by some excesses of which some parties of the soldiers were guilty. The inhabitants of the hamlets and villages, overwhelmed with consternation at the sudden descent upon their shores of such a vast horde of wild and desperate foreigners, fled in all directions. Some made their escape into the interior. Others, taking with them the helpless members of their households, and such valuables as they could carry, sought refuge in monasteries and churches, supposing that such sanctuaries as those, not even soldiers, unless they were pagans, would dare to violate. Others, still, attempted to conceal themselves in thickets and fanes till the vast throng which was sweeping onward like a tornado should have passed. Though William afterwards always evinced a decided disposition to protect the peaceful inhabitants of the country from all aggressions on the part of his troops, he had no time to attend to that subject now. He was intent on pressing forward to a place of safety. William reached at length a position which seemed to him suitable for a permanent encampment. It was an elevated land near the sea. To the westward of it was a valley formed by a sort of recess opened in the range of chalky cliffs, which here form the shore of England. In the bottom of this valley, down upon the beach, was a small town, then of no great consequence or power, but whose name, which was Hastings, has since been immortalized by the battle which was fought in its vicinity a few days after William's arrival. The position which William selected for his encampment was on a high land in the vicinity of the town. The lines of the encampment were marked out, and the forts or castles which had been brought from Normandy were set within the enclosures. Vast multitudes of laborers were soon at work, throwing up embankments, and building redoubts and bastions, while others were transporting the arms, the provisions, and the munitions of war, and storing them in security within the lines. The encampment was soon completed, and the long line of tents were set up in streets and squares within it. By the time, however, that the work was done, some of William's agents and spies came into the camp from the north, saying that in 4 days Harold would be upon him at the head of 100,000 men. End of chapter 9.